Um, so let's see. Cool. Live both on both platforms. I'm going to go ahead and get this shared out. How's everybody doing? Um, it's just a wonderful Sunday night. Um, I'm just getting this shared with everybody. Um, so this is going to be a solo episode just with me. John had some obligations as well as just scheduling conflicts. It's also the same reason on why we're doing it, why I'm doing it tonight and not on Thursday. We both had scheduling conflicts, so you know we want to make sure that we can still bring this to you guys, but at the same time, you know it's just going to be me. So it's going to be a relatively short episode, but I hope it's going to be pretty enjoyable as well as pretty informative. So if you are reading the title, you'll know a little bit about what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to be talking about my 1 year ownership of electric vehicle. It's going to be really cool. We'll go through some of over the overarching experience that I've had, as well as some of the numbers when it comes to like maintenance, charging costs, all sorts of things. And then some of the pros and cons that I've had to deal with or work on around, and some of the things that I've had, within my small amount of time that I've owned it. Of course, I want to try to do this, as long as I can, as long as I have an EV, because I know a lot of people are on the fence, and especially now that there's becoming more and more government regulations when it comes to, or I should really say, incentives when it comes to electric vehicles. I think nowadays it's becoming more and more of a thing that you're going to start seeing more and more of people getting electric vehicles as and so, if you're curious, this is going to be an amazing episode for you because you're going to get my opinions, my thoughts on how it's been. I'll also throw in some of my thoughts on some of the other electric vehicles, um, ones that I don't own, but stuff that I've learned, um, and kind of give you a little bit more information on that. And of course, if you guys have any questions or comments or thoughts on any of this, go ahead and jump in there. That's the whole point of us doing our live streams, right? It's to get your insight on how you feel about some of the stuff that we're talking about and kind of help also steer the conversation. So, all right, with all of that being said, I'm going to go ahead and start our recording, and then we'll jump right into it. Recording on the audio side. So yeah, for you audio listeners, right? Um, all right. So for this week's episode, it's going to be a solo episode. So it's me, just Denison here. I'm going to go ahead and talk about my 1 year um, experience of owning an electric vehicle. It's such a different experience, and I'm incredibly blessed to be able to be a part of it, or even be able to get to this point where I can have an electric vehicle and be able to go throughout the whole process of it so far. So I'm just really going to give you guys an update about what I've experienced as an electric vehicle owner, whether that be the pros, the cons. We'll get down to, I'll start with the overarching kind of theme of what I've experienced so far, and then we'll get down to a little bit more of the nitty gritty of, like, I don't know, charging costs, some pros and cons that I've had to deal with, maintenance, if there is any, right, and just overall stuff like that, because I know it's such a new thing, right, for everybody. Um, they are becoming more and more prevalent, as you can already probably know. A lot of automakers have already started to really push this more and more. And with more government regulations and incentives and all sorts of other stuff like that, it's becoming one of those things that is going to be more and more of a normal thing for for most consumers. So I'm just gonna do my part and kind of tell you guys how I've felt about it, how it's been, and hopefully it helps your decision if you're out there looking to buy a new car, right? What would you buy? Are you going to buy an electric car? Are you going to buy a regular internal combustion engine car? Or are you going to buy a hybrid? I'll also try to share a little bit of my thoughts on that as well. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and stop here, or I'm going to go ahead and get our intro going, and then we'll jump right into it. Okay. Uh, let's see. Three, two, one. What's going on, everybody? I'm Denison, and this is the Catchup. Oh man, that feels weird, but it is what it is. So, I hope everyone's doing all right. Doing all right. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. It is a little late. I got to get up for work. But I'm going to try to get through everything as much stuff as I can um, in a nice, timely manner. Hopefully, it's nice. So, let's go ahead and jump into it. All right. Three, two, one. So, like always, guys, I'm going to go through the count them, three main ways that you can help support the show. Number one is you can leave a like and a comment and also subscribe to this show. That's a great way to kind of get that message out, to get um, our podcast out to more people, so that way we can have one more viewers, one more listeners, and just more people to join into the conversation, as well as just more people to really enjoy kind of what we have to talk about. I mean, of course, we talk about anything under the sun. Lately it's been more about tech, but we always just kind of go about it. It's a part of the catch up, right? So yeah, please like, rate, and subscribe to the Catch Up podcast wherever you're listening to it, because it's a great way for us to grow our community and really be able to, um, you know, have more people jump into the conversation with us. Number two, another great way that you can support us is by checking out our merch. We sell all sorts of things, right? We sell hats, beanies, mugs, um, hoodies, uh, uh, all sorts of stuff, phone cases. Man, it's also there's all sorts of stuff that we actually have. That's a great way to support the show. Those proceeds go directly to us. Of course, there is a small monetary value that goes into the creation of those goods, but at the same time, that is a great way to support the show, to support us in our endeavors to keep this going, to keep our podcast going. It's not free, sadly, but um, it's something that we enjoy to do, and we want to continue to be able to bring to you guys. And so that is an amazing way that you can support the show. Um, and number three, John's probably going to get me, but I am actually blanking on what number three is. But I think one of the biggest things another way that you can support the show is simply just, is going to be a little bit out of order or whatever like that. But word of mouth, right? If you guys really enjoy listening to the podcast, please, tell friends, tell family members, check it out, to check us out, because we love growing our community. Um, and the more viewers that we have, the more people we can have into our conversations, as well as uh, more ways that we can reach more of our audience, as well as other people, such as, like, I don't know, advertisers and all sorts of other things, to help grow our podcast even more. So please go ahead and share that out. We love hearing from you guys. You can always jump into the comments on this live stream, or you can also do it after the video. We read those after the video, or if you're listening on the audio, you can also jump in on the comments there. We also will read that stuff as well. Rating our podcast is another amazing way that you can um, support the show. Helps us grow, helps us get more uh, viewers, listeners, all sorts of other stuff. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and jump into our topic for tonight, which is my experience as an EV owner, my 1 year experience. It's been a year since I have had my Tesla Model 3, which has been really, really great. Still puts a smile on my face every time I see it. And it's been a wild ride. A lot has happened, a lot has changed. Um, and so I kind of want to go over that. I want to go over that experience that I've had so far, and um, some of my thoughts, my takeaways that I've gotten so far, and we'll also get down into some of the nitty gritty about it. So we'll start off with the overarching experience, right? I'll say for overarching experience, I have loved being an EV electric vehicle owner. It's been pretty great, honestly. Um, I have there's stuff that you don't think about, um, that you don't I guess you don't think about missing in some ways when it comes to owning an electric vehicle, like for instance, gas stations. It's a weird thing to think about, but it's just it's nice to be able to wake up and on most occasions be able to wake up with a full tank, quote unquote, right? Or just fully charged EV to where I can, automatically go to wherever I need, and I have the most amount of charge that I would need for the day or whatever like that. So that's been a really wonderful experience that I have truly enjoyed. Um, because it's so different than like, oh man, I have to factor in some time to go to the gas station, right? If I have like a normal ICE vehicle or a internal combustion engine, right, vehicle, I have to factor in time, say if I'm running late to somewhere to get some gas. Sure, technically the whole gas experience is probably somewhere around 5 minutes, as opposed to when you're charging up an electric vehicle, it's a lot longer. But and I wouldn't even say a lot longer, honestly. If I'm in a really rush, a lot of times if I can go to, there's a lot of superchargers, at least in the area that I live in, as well as the areas that I have been around in. Usually the chargers are relatively close. The superchargers, to be more specific, since I have a Tesla, it's superchargers are probably my going to be, or always for the most part, going to be the way to go for me. There are, of course, other electric vehicle charging stations, but in my experience, the superchargers have one been the most reliable, as well as they have been the ones that tend to get me through or tend to charge me up fastest. So that's why I would go with superchargers. But anyway, I can usually go to a supercharger, and if I just need a little bit of juice right before I go home or something like that, or before I'm going to a destination, I could literally stop at like a supercharger for like 15 minutes, and that's probably going to get me enough to get to wherever I need to go, and then back to home. And then the nice part about it is I can charge at home, and I'm congratulations back to a full tank, quote unquote, or just a full, I don't know, battery charge or whatever. So that's been really, really helpful. And so that's one thing that, sure, that 5 minutes that you get from a gas station, filling up at a gas station is nice, but 15 minutes isn't that much of an issue. I don't find it that much of an issue. Now, of course, I think some of that has just been something that I've adapted to. I'll say most of the time I have not had to use a supercharger. Um, Only relatively recently where I have had to use a supercharger on a day-to-day basis when it comes to going to specific places outside of, the norm or whatever. Um, and I'll even say that that's still in a weird in between, right? So what I mean by that is, so since I've moved now to Austin, which is a whole different place. My living situation a little bit different because before, when I was in Dallas, I had a townhome, so I had a garage, of course. I could plug into the garage, which was we had installed a level 2 charger, so then I could fully charge my car, say from like 10% in like 8 hours or something like that. Sometimes it'd be little bit less than that. So from 10%, I can charge my car all the way up in 8 hours. To 90% is what I usually kept the charging limit at. Excuse me. And um, so it's been I didn't really have to worry too much. But when I moved here, I didn't have access, not initially, to a level 2 charger. So level 1 would be considered like your wall plug, right? It's super, super slow, but it does technically work, and you can charge fully up. Just it's going to take a while, right? For instance, um, let's see. I think today I plugged in around, I don't know, maybe two or so. And I was at like 52%, and it gave me like an estimate, and this is me plugging directly into the wall, and it gave me an estimate of like, I don't know, 13, or it was something like 18 hours or something like that, to fully charge myself up to 90%. So that is the speeds that we're talking about when it comes to level 1, right? And then when we have a level 2 charger, that is where we get to that 8 hour mark, right? If you're at like 10%, and then you're going all the way up to say like 90%. Um, of course, it gets shortened depending on where you would charge, right? So, for instance, if I was at like 50%, I think normally it would only take me like 3 hours or something like that to get myself charged back up. So, while I'm in this apartment, it's been a little bit harder. When I first moved here, there actually was a charger. It was actually one of the main reasons why I actually chose to live here, was because they had a charger that was on site. Only one for the whole complex, which I feel like was, I should have thought of that a little bit more, but it is what it is. Um, but anyway, they had that one charger there, and so cool. I was like, all right, well, I'm going to use it. Well, funny enough, for I would say first 5 months of being here, that charger was not working at all, or it would work for maybe, I don't know, a couple of hours or so, and then someone would go to plug in, and then it would just shut off. So that was really frustrating. And that's one thing, I guess, to note as an EV owner that you do have to worry about, is that charging infrastructure is hit or miss when it comes to being outside of like Tesla's stuff. That's one thing that I've noticed a lot. Um, is that when you are outside of the Tesla network, right? And not saying that Tesla doesn't have issues, because they do, but when you're outside of the Tesla network, sometimes it becomes a little bit more of the wild, wild west, when it comes to if you can plug into a charger and it actually works, right? So, for instance, like I was talking about before, charger at my apartment, I would plug in, and it would just blow a fuse essentially, and then it would shut off, and then I'd have to talk to the building managers, and eventually it gets turned back on, and then it doesn't work. Well, finally, after 5, 6 months, somewhere around there, they've actually had a charger that has been more consistent. Funny enough, it actually has two stalls, right, to where you can charge two electric vehicles at a time. But funny thing about that is that only one works, so it's only like partially fixed. But at least that one is relatively consistent. So that's been really helpful at times when I can actually get to the charger. That's the other thing, right? It's one charger for one complex, um, for the whole complex, I should say. And there's actually more EV owners than I expected here. So it's been kind of a, get there as fast as you can kind of situation when it comes to being able to charge. Um, but with all that being said, that has been a struggle that I have had to deal with, when it comes to charging in general. Um, for the most part, I've found that, um, for my week going to and from work, right? If I can start off at 90, by the end of the week, I'll usually probably be somewhere down to, I'd say a 20-30%, right, of charge. Now, this is me going to work, coming back, and then maybe doing some errands or whatever like that, coming back to my garage, and then plugging in to that really slow level one charger. And that gets me up. Usually I get around 20% back for the day, and then I do it all over again. And so eventually that gets me down to around 30% when I get to the weekend. And the nice part about that is that usually I'm not going out a huge amount, or if I am using, my fiance's car, or we're using my fiance's car. And so in that case, right, um, I can have my car charge essentially throughout the whole weekend, and I get back to 90 and I'm good to go. So that has been my charging experience for the most part. And it is something that I'm consistently struggling with or trying to work with. I think right now I'm trying to see if the apartment complex is actually going to let me, install a level two charger in the garage that I currently have. And then that will greatly increase the amount of, um, well, really and truly, it'll just greatly increase my charging speeds and stuff like that, and less issues, right? It becomes less of a headache that I have to worry about. Um, so that's kind of how that's my weird deal. When I was at my townhome, I didn't have any issues because all of the stuff was working properly and I didn't have to worry too much. One nice part about me charging here is that since my garage isn't technically connected to my unit, um, it means that my charging is free because it's technically taking power from the building. Um, and not coming out of my own power bill. So that is an amazing thing. I am charging for free ever since I've been here in Austin for the most part. Because I also have charging at work. So that's the other thing. If you have charging at work, that's an amazing thing that you get to utilize. And in some cases, it's free. For in my case, it's actually free if I can get there early enough. Um, it's kind of a hit or miss thing for me that I have to deal with. But if I can get there early enough, it becomes really, really nice. It's a nice perk. So, like I said, while I've been in Austin, for the most part, I have been able to charge for free. So that's a whole deal. And we'll go into like full on charging, how much I had to charge in a whole year, how much that cost me, all that other stuff a little bit later. But I just wanted to kind of touch on that really quickly. But anyway, the other experiences that I've really had to worry about or that I have experienced have been pretty nice for the most part. It's not that much different than a ICE vehicle. I mean, other than the charging aspect of it, um, the speed is one of the great things that I love. The acceleration, it's instant, right? So you can go as fast as you want, and the power is always on demand. You're not shifting down. If you have ever noticed that in your normal vehicle, you have to, when you stomp on the pedal, there's a couple of seconds delay before you actually start to speed up, right? Unless you have a really nice high performance vehicle, then it's a little bit different. But there's none of that kick down, right? It's the power is there always on demand. There's no gears, there's no transmission. It's just power all the time. So it's really nice. I've really enjoyed that. That's great for merging. It's great for a lot of things. Um, and it's probably one of my favorite things of being an electric vehicle owner is just that instant torque and how fun it is. I think that's the other thing. It's um, been a great experience, but incredibly fun. Um, and it looks like my dad's chimed in here. So he asks, has there any been, gosh darn, any problems in cold or cool weather? Um, yes. So that is a thing that you do have to worry about as an EV owner. I would say uh, big, big swings in temperatures can cause issues with range. I would say the cold more than anything else. Um, the cold does affect your range. It does. Um, the I have found that sometimes it can use like maybe 10 to 15% more range than usual when it's really cold. So that is something that I have had to deal with. The big reason on that is because your vehicle has to keep the battery at a certain temperature. And as the weather gets colder, um, more of the power from that battery is actually having to be used to keep the battery alive in some ways, or really it's more along the lines of keeping the battery at a certain optimal temperature, as well as whenever you are going to say use a supercharger, right? For instance, like your high power DC fast charging, um, you do something that's called preconditioning. It's for all almost all EVs at this point have preconditioning. Um, and what it is it's warming the batteries up or cooling the batteries down to get them to an optimal temperature so that you can charge a lot faster and there's less damage that you have to worry about for the battery in general. So that way you don't get extreme degradation of the battery. So it's like, your phone, right? For instance, if you charge up your phone, if you may have heard that charging up your phone uh, and it gets really, really hot, is not good for your battery over long term. It's similar for EVs, right? You don't want it to be super hot, you don't want it to be super cold. You want it to be in this nice little lukewarm zone or whatever like that. Teslas have, at least in my opinion, and what I've learned and what I have read, as well as what I've experienced, do a pretty decent job of thermal management when it comes to charging and battery degradation. But also, that also does come sometimes at a cost if we're going back to the cold weather analogy, right? They have made improvements. So, for instance, the Tesla Model 3 that I have, which is an older one, uses what is it? Inductive heating or whatever like that to heat up the car as well as heat up the batteries, which is essentially using the heat from the motors, the electric motors, to heat the battery up and stuff like that. Um, where the newer Model Ys, 3s, essentially the newer Teslas use a heat pump, which has a much higher efficiency when it comes to keeping the battery at the right temperature as well as heating up the car, all sorts of stuff. And so I have heard that that does a much better job on keeping the amount of range that you have um, available to you more, so you're able to have more range during the cold weather. But yes, cold weather does affect it. It is something that I have to prepare for a little bit more, just in the thought process of if it is super duper cold and I have a long commute, like a really, really long commute, um, there may be a moment where I need to use a supercharger. But that goes to, for charging networks, right? Since I have a Tesla, I will say that it's been one of the nicer things is that I don't really have to worry that much when it comes to using like fast charging. So DC fast charging, there's always a supercharger kind of close. It's not on par with the level of like a gas station, right? For instance, like I can go a mile down and boom, there's a gas station, but it's very close to that. Especially in more populous areas. So, like especially when I was in Dallas, there was tons of superchargers everywhere. Austin is also similar to that. There's a decent amount. When you start getting more into like the boonies, it starts to get a little bit more sparse. But gas stations also kind of get close to that point too. So there is a little bit to being said that way, but I just wanted to throw that in there. But yeah, so that is something to think about, to worry about. Um, I haven't felt that it affects me enough to where I feel like, oh man, this is a really big issue. And especially when we go into when it comes to charging costs and stuff like that, I don't think it was enough to make me feel like, man, this is a terrible decision. Like I really regret getting an EV because of just how much it costs me in charging because of the cold weather. So I it's not really that much of an issue for me, at least in my opinion. It hasn't been anything. Charging is relatively cheap, so again, it's not like I'm filling up the whole time. Um let's see, where was I? So yeah, things let's see, things that I really like. Acceleration, technology is really cool, at least for, I would say almost all EVs at this point have a huge amount of technology. It's kind of like technology overload. So if you're really big on technology and like cool tech stuff, EVs are really amazing for that because they have so much packed into them. Um, my I enjoy my Tesla. It's a weird experience because there's no regular gauge cluster that you normally will see. It's just a big old center console screen, but you get used to that very quickly. Um, and it's been really fun. It's really cool. I've got cameras everywhere. There's tons of really cool features that I didn't think about, even thinking about, but they're there, right? I can watch TV on my in my car while I'm charging. Um, it's nice that I can do a lot of stuff for my car in the application, right? So, for instance, I'm going to show you if I can get it to pull up here. So I can see like my car, right? For instance, right here, I can see my car. I can see everything that's going on. I can see where that it's charging. I can see how long it's been charging for. All sorts of stuff. I can put my charging limit. I can unlock all that cool stuff. So that's really nice, right? I can actually use my phone as a key, which is really nice because now I don't have to have a keys. So that's a really fun and amazing thing that I get an opportunity to deal with. So, and a lot of EVs nowadays have similar features to Tesla's or any other. It's like I said, technology overload. You're getting tons of stuff like that. Um, so that has been really, really fun. I'm a tech person, so it makes sense for me. Um, and let's see, my dad actually has another question, which was there a technology learning curve for you? For me, it wasn't that hard, I guess. But again, I'm a tech person, so it's super easy for me to grab into it, especially if it's something that I'm really interested in. But there was a learning curve on how some of the technologies were implemented. I'm also a big car person, right? So knowing these technologies to begin with, even if I've never actually experienced them, but knowing of them and knowing at least a little bit of how they work, and then getting into a car where I have to implement all of that knowledge that I had, it wasn't too hard, but it was a really, there was a little bit of a learning curve, at least at first. I think one of the biggest ones that was a little bit harder, where both EVs and hybrids actually have implemented this, is regenerative braking, which quick and easy way to think of it is for ICE vehicles, right? You have the engine brake. If you've ever heard of that, you have your engine brake where you can essentially use the force of decelerating the car to slow down your car a lot faster than what you would traditionally be able to do with your brakes. So for EVs, we're using that same deal, that same principle with the, but you're doing it with the electric motors, and with that energy that is being created from reducing your speed and lowering all of that, that gets pushed back into your battery, which extends your range, which is really, really nice. I would say all EV vehicles at this point should have that, but if they don't, I would try to get one that does. It's weird if you find one, so you should tell me about that if you do. But yeah, all of them have that. Um, it's weird to get used to because it's essentially your it feels like a video game in some ways, right? Your the moment that you take your foot off the gas or off the accelerator in this case, your car is automatically stopping or starting to slow itself down. um so it's a weird experience to get used to. It's a weird technology to get used to. There are some EV manufacturers that allow you to fully turn that off. If you have a Tesla, you don't really have that option. It's just on or slightly on, but it's always on. Um, so honestly, I think it's something that you should get used to learning how to use, because of the gains that you get are incredibly helpful, especially when it comes to like city driving where there's a lot of stop and go, or even traffic in general that's on like highways. It's great to use because you're getting a ton of energy back. I know, where as opposed to if you have like a gas car, right? The more that you're in like bumper to bumper traffic, the lower your efficiency is. Um, when it comes to just driving in general, it's not great for your car. So it's kind of cool to see the inverse when you have an EV. Um, and Christina jumped in here and said, that's my favorite feature. And yeah, it is. It's a weird thing to get used to. It's a weird concept to get used to, but when you do, it feels really cool, and it's a really kind of fun like trick to do. It also the another cool thing about it is that it also increases the lifespan of your brake pads, right? So you don't need to change your brake pads as much because you're not relying on your brakes, right, anymore. You're relying on regenerative braking, which does not utilize your brake pads at all. So that's a really cool thing, especially when you get it dialed in just right. Um, let's see. I guess when it comes to other technologies that were a part of my Tesla experience, I think the only other one that would have been that did have a steep learning curve, I would say, for me was autopilot. Um, Especially because the version of autopilot that I have is a little bit different. So there's traditional autopilot, which is relatively, for the most part, it's essentially just adaptive cruise control. It's a lot of people like to say like, oh man, it's self-driving, but it's just adaptive cruise control with lane centering for the most part, or I should say lane centering and lane following. So any vehicle that has that, you could quote unquote say that has autopilot, but that's essentially what it is. Um, so mine has the enhanced autopilot package, which was one feature that I kind of really wanted, and that's one reason why I bought it, the car that I have. Um, and what enhanced autopilot does is it not only does it, lane follow and keep you in the center of the lane and have adaptive cruise control or whatever like that, but it also makes it to where if you are turning, or not turning, I should say, if you're changing lanes, you can just turn on your blinker, or if the vehicle knows, because you'll put in your navigation, right? If the vehicle knows that you have an exit here or whatever, a mile away, it'll start moving you over automatically. Of course, it always asks for your input before it decides to do that, but it can do it by itself, which is really cool. And it's gotten a lot better actually from when I first started using it. So that's been a really cool experience as well. The thought process of your car changing and getting better over time is such a strange concept to jump into, but it's so cool and so incredible when it comes to like a value proposition, right? Because now you have a car that is truly, at least technology wise, always getting better and always going to have some sort of new feature. Of course, there are certain things that, like hardware limitations, that any vehicle is going to have, or any piece of tech is going to have, but it's really, really amazing to see that change, right? I think I've talked about it a couple different times on the podcast about like new updates that get pushed out, um, and I have this whole new feature that I didn't even think of, right? That they just have on there. Like for instance, I think Tesla made it to where now you can. It was a new feature that you can turn on your blinker and you can change lanes, right? Even if you're not using autopilot, you'll change lanes. Not the car changing lanes, but you'll change lanes, and then the car will turn off your blinker once you have fully merged into that lane, which is really cool and super fun. Um, or kind of a nice convenient thing, right? There was also an update to make it to where it can recognize like stoplights, and it will ding at you whenever a stoplight has turned green, so that way uh, if you're not paying attention, you can't, it's essentially telling you, hey, it's time to go. So that's a really cool experience. um and yeah, so my dad also just chimed in here again, and he said, yeah, so you're saying the car grows and gets smarter over time. Exactly. Yes. Um, I can say that for sure for Teslas. I know a lot of other auto electric vehicle manufacturers are also doing this. I know Rivian and Lucid are also very much on that same kind of software push of, your car getting better over time, always. Um, let's see. I have also noticed too that one thing, at least that's specific to Teslas, a lot of people don't talk about is, well, I would say they do, but I think people outside of Tesla don't hear it as much, outside of like a Tesla ownership deal, which is phantom braking. I have noticed, at least in my day to day drives or so, that phantom braking has become a little bit better, or not better, I should say. It's become less frequent for me to have to worry about. Not saying that it's gone, because it does happen from time to time, but I would say that it's much more subdued than I had noticed. At one point, it actually had gotten worse, right? From when I first owned my car, it seemed to only happen every blue moon, and then it started to get a little bit more frequent. And now I feel like it's starting to kind of lower that pace. So there are also bugs that kind of can pop up in these smarter updates, right? But for the most part, overall, it's been a really great situation. And I know that other more traditional auto manufacturers who are creating EVs are trying to move towards a similar model of, software being, just as important in the car as the car itself, or I guess the drivetrain or whatever like that. So that's been a really, really cool deal that I've got to experience with me being an EV owner. Um, let's see what else. I guess so. One of the other things that I should mention. So, for instance, when it comes to inspections, so this is actually a really interesting topic. So, especially if you live in Texas, and eventually it'll probably be more stuff trickling down as more EV owners pop pop up across the country. But for instance, when it came to inspections this year, which was really cool, I think my inspection was like $5, because there's no emissions inspection. So the actual inspection itself was like $5, and it was like a 5 to 10 minute process. I just drove up, they did whatever they did, and then they brought it back. I mean, inspections usually are relatively quick, but it was probably, I feel like it was a lot faster than what I have experienced, what I've experienced in the past. So that was really cool. I got to do my inspection insanely fast, and it was relatively cheap. Now, one thing to note, Texas is one of the newer states that is implementing a tax on EVs in a different way than what vehicle registration taxes have been implemented beforehand. So, for instance, if you have a regular ICE vehicle, so a regular internal combustion engine vehicle, you don't pay like an extra fee or whatever like that when you register, right? I think in Texas it's like 75, $76 or whatever like that whenever you're registering your car, re-registering your car, or renewing your registration, whatever. So yeah, you'll pay like $75 plus your inspection, of course, whatever that is. And then that's it. And then technically your taxes or your other stuff for your vehicle gets paid when you go to fill up your gas tank, right? So it gets, there's a certain amount of tax that is input into the gas prices that is used to help for roads and all sorts of other stuff. Well, for starting in September of this year, if you were to say buy a new EV or your registration is up in September, you will have to pay an additional um, I think it's $400, which is kind of crazy, but yeah, it's like $400 for this year, right? And then it will be a subsequent $200 every time that you register afterwards. That is more of an annoyance than it was before, right? The state has said that this is in an effort to try to collect taxes from EV owners, even though they represent a very, very, very small portion, especially in Texas, um, that make up vehicles on the road. But apparently, they are trying to implement this as a, say, quote unquote future kind of thing. Now, and of course, other states have implemented similar taxes. I know in California they have one that's really expensive as well. So it's something that eventually I would imagine is going to become a norm for a lot of stuff. It's just kind of a hard pill to swallow when it comes to your first registration or anything like that. So that is something to look out for and to think about. Um, I think we're just in this weird in between growing pain stage right now. And so every state is trying to figure out some other way to deal with EVs and how they're going to charge and tax people. But that's how they do it in Texas. It's kind of annoying, but it is what it is. Um, let's see. So I guess going on the topic we're going out of like vehicle registration. The We'll jump now into maintenance, and then I can also jump into charging. And of course, if you guys have any other questions, I'll jump into those and talk about that. But so maintenance for me for the year of ownership, it was a used vehicle, but it was with really low miles, and I didn't really have any maintenance, not really. Well, okay. So I'll be honest, the maintenance that I have done so far is two things. Um, I filled up my washer fluid. So that's like, I don't know, $10. Um, um, but to be more serious, the only other maintenance that I have had to do is change out my tires. So I bought 4 brand new tires for my car because the tires that I had on there were pretty much gone at that point. I bought them with a decent amount of tread, but I'm not going to say that they were perfect. So it was enough to get me through a whole year, but it wasn't enough to you know for me to say that it was like, it had tons and tons of tread left. So that was kind of my bad. That was something that I should have looked at a little bit more. Um, but anyway, so I bought 4 brand new tires. I think somewhere it cost somewhere around $900 or so for all 4 tires. Um, it was a little bit more expensive than what I wanted. There was actually a different brand that I wanted. If I would have done it over again, I probably would have ended up only paying somewhere around $800, maybe close to $750 for all of my tires because there was a specific brand that I wanted. But um, in the time frame when I needed to get those tires, I had to go to a specific place. So, for instance, I went to Discount Tire to get my tires. They are Michelin's, so they're much higher quality um, tires. The ones that I was going to go for before were some other brand. They weren't Michelin's, but they were, from what I had read, from reviews, they're really, really good. So they were going to be on par with Michelin's. But um, yeah, those tires were a little bit more expensive than what I have probably bought in the past. And that is something to note when you are an EV owner. Technically, your tires, depending on what type of tires you go for, because all tires are will technically work on an EV, but there is a certain amount of comfort that you may remove since you do not have engine noise to drown out certain things or whatever like that. Your tires become something that you hear more. Um, and so lower quality tires can lead to lower quality or more noise when it comes to that, or in maybe even um, in some ways less range, um, as well as a rougher ride. So one thing to note, you will also probably go through tires more often, um, because the most electric vehicles are heavier. So because you have a big battery pack on the bottom of the vehicle, so they will usually, as well as they accelerate a lot faster so than ICE vehicles. So you will probably go through tires a lot faster, depending on how you know much of a lead foot you have. Um, but my tires lasted me quite a while. I would say even with the tread that they were at, I probably still got. Mm, I would say I at least got 20,000 miles on those tires, somewhere around there. Okay, I'll say probably closer to 15,000 miles on those tires when they were probably around like halfway mark. So, um, halfway, maybe a little less than halfway, actually, when it comes to tread wear. So I got a decent amount of um, tire or a decent amount of tire life out of that. My new ones should last me longer. I'm hoping that they do. But for the most part, it sounds like, in what I've researched, it seems like you'll be changing. You may, again, every experience is different, but you may end up changing tires like every, I don't know, 2 years or so, maybe something like that. It also depends on how much you're driving. So, something to look out for and something to think about. Um, so that's my other maintenance costs. It's something that I probably won't have to deal with for a little bit at least. Um, Everything else though has been pretty sound. I mean, there's not a lot of things that you have to really think about, right? Of course, my next thing will probably be tire rotation or whatever like that that I'll have to do. But again, that's usually not that expensive. Of course, there may be like alignments or whatever like that, but I haven't had to deal with any of that. Let's think of other maintenance costs that may come up. Um, there's not really. I mean, there's not really many. Like I said before, with brakes, to be more specific, you're not going to do your brake pads that often because, again, um, with regenerative braking, if you're using it properly and just in general, you're probably not going to be running out. Your brakes aren't going to degrade super fast. And so I will say that some manufacturers have said that you will have, um, what is it? You'll have like a lifelong brakes or whatever like that. I don't think that's true. I don't think you'll have your brake pads for that long, but you might have some, you might have it to where it'll be a while before you have to change your brake pads. And rotors, I'm almost certain at this point that you will probably have those for the life of the car. Maybe. I don't know. But yeah, maintenance, super simple, super quick, super easy. I haven't had any, like I said, again, I haven't had any real issues. I probably need to change my cabin air filter, but I don't know. Let's see. Before I jump over to, and I'll talk about it in tandem, but for charging, I think that's another big one for you. So, and when it comes to charging, I'll talk about first, like domestic charging or whatever like that. And what I mean by domestic is like if you're like putting around town. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but I'll kind of go a little bit more in depth. And then when it comes to charging long trips, right? So, um, putting around town, I don't really use superchargers for the most part. One, it's not super great for the battery if you're using it a huge amount of time because it puts a lot of stress on the battery. You're, it's you're forcing a whole bunch of electricity into a battery pack at a very fast rate. Um, and so it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. If you keep doing that, it's not great. um, so it's not great for your battery at least. So that is something to think about when it comes to it. But yeah, I have very rarely had to use superchargers unless it's a very busy day where I'm going multiple places or whatever like that. I do have like a 30-minute drive to work, 30-minute or so, 30-minute to 40-minute sometimes drive to work. Um, and so that does make a difference when it comes to how much range I'm using, especially because my drive to work is also relatively fast. The faster that you go, I mean, this is the same with any vehicle, but especially with EVs, the faster that you go, the more energy you're going to be using, right? So the more battery power I'm using, if you're in the regular vehicle or whatever like that, more gas you're going to use. Same thing. So that is something to be said too. Um, let's see. My dad chimed in here and he says, does the Tesla hold the road as well as your previous vehicle? Yeah, I would say so. Sometimes I feel like it's a little bit better. I feel like sometimes I'll have more traction in my Tesla than I had um in my Sonata. Um, I can take corners a lot faster. But no, I mean I feel like they're pretty solid. It's a pretty solid car, and you tend to have a lot more traction in general because again your batteries are on the bottom of the car, so it makes the center of gravity much lower. Where with ICE vehicles, depending on how everything's situated, your center of gravity can be a little bit different. So I will say that it does feel more stable on the road than my previous vehicle. Um, That's a great question. But yeah, no, I think it's great. I don't really have any issues with it. I feel like it's a lot more sportier. The steering is a lot more responsive. Some of that could just be because of its newer technology and it's a newer vehicle in general. But for the most part, I would say that it's been a great experience. Um, Going back to charging, um, I haven't had to deal with much long trips now. To jump into um, long trips and long charging, I have done multiple long trips. So actually, this is great for me to give a little bit more info on. So first, funny enough, when I it was probably within the first 2 weeks of owning my Model 3, I took a trip up to Kansas in it, and it was super fun, right? The trip normally takes somewhere between 5 hours and 30 minutes and 6 hours if I have like my normal ICE vehicle, right? So when I had my Sonata, it'd be somewhere around there, depending on how fast I'm moving. Um, uh, in my EV, it took around 6 hours and 30 minutes. Was pretty much my deal. So in my Sonata, I had to charge, or sorry, not not charge, but I fueled up once in Oklahoma City, I think it was, and then after that, that would be it. Get I'd get there, and I'd be good. Um, for my In my Model 3, I charged up all the way up to 100, if I'm not mistaken, when I left. I got all the way to one thing too, I should say, just real quick. Um, One cool part about EVs is that you don't have a lot of moments where you have to worry about range anxiety, because if you are using the navigation a lot, your car will tell you if you need to charge, and it'll route you to where you need to go if you need to charge. So when I was going up to Kansas, right, I put in my the GPS coordinates for John's place, and it it mapped out my whole journey, right? It mapped out all my chargers. It mapped out how long I need to stay at those chargers. And then it also mapped out and said, like, okay, so if you stay here for that long, you'll get um you'll get this amount of charge, and then you'll go to this location, and then you'll get this amount of charge, right? Or whatever like that. And so throughout that whole process, I charged all the way up to 100 from where my location was in Dallas. Um, I drove all the way to Oregon or something like that. I don't know, something Oklahoma. Drove there, charged up for about 20 minutes or so. And then I moved up to, I think it was Perry, Oklahoma, or something similar to that. Um, it was like on the edge of Oklahoma, because that was one thing that I noticed is Kansas, going up to Kansas from that direction, there was fewer chargers when I got once it gets into the Kansas portion, right? It was like Oklahoma, and then the next charger was, or it was like the border of Oklahoma, and then the next charger was Wichita. So like the heart of Kansas at that point. So there was a little bit of a distance there. But anyway, I stayed there probably for about 30 minutes or so, so I could get, enough charge to get me all the way to my destination, because it actually said, no, you'll be fine. You can make it to your destination um, without having to charge up again. And so I just went straight there, and I got there with like 30% charge. So that was fine. That was great. And then going back was pretty much the same route. Um, I charged all the way up. I didn't charge up to 100. I think I charged up to like 90 in Wichita. And then from Wichita, going back home, I had, I think, two stops, maybe somewhere around there, maybe a little less. Um, Cool thing about that is that all of those charges, I think, all the way up, I spent a total of maybe $50. Uh, $50 going up, maybe, and then coming down, maybe $50. It was probably closer to like 40 going down because I had a little, it was a little bit more efficient. So, pricing wise, it was relatively comparable to a gas powered vehicle, maybe a little less, especially during that time because the gas prices were a little bit higher. Um, but yeah, so that was relatively inexpensive trip. And then I've made multiple trips to and from Austin and Dallas. Of course, the trip coming here when I was moving, but also just trips back and forth in general, just to see friends and stuff. And I only have to charge usually once, um, and then and that one charge is usually really cheap. I think most of the time I'll pay maybe like maybe if depending on how long I'm there, like $15. So I'm paying for the most part probably somewhere there and back, somewhere around $15 or well, no, I'll say to be fair, I'm probably paying somewhere around $30 for the whole trip. So there back $30 for charging. So not that bad, not that bad at all. Um, Let me think. So I actually have some graphs for you guys, just in case you wanted to be, those nerds and see exactly how much charging is, right? So, for instance, as I said before, currently in Austin, or where I live currently in Austin, I don't have to, since it's not attached, the garage is not attached to my apartment. I do not have to pay charging. It's just free. And even if I use the level 2 charging that is on site, that is also free to residents. So um, it makes it super cheap, right? So for instance, if we're looking at this graph here, which is for home or for this month or whatever like that, um, I spent a total of like $90. And $90 is including, or $90 is not using or home charging being for free. And these red marks are all superchargers. So whenever I've had to use superchargers, um, that is probably where most of my money is going to. Right. So $90 when it comes to supercharging. On here, it's showing 38% was that supercharging. Home was 59%. Work was 1% whenever I can actually charge up at work, which is great. Um, and then there's an other, which is probably different charger thingies or whatever like that. Probably the level 2 charger that we have here. But $90 for the whole month. Um, Depending on how fuel efficient your, regular vehicle is, it's not bad. Um, so, and then I also have it for the whole year. Well, whole-ish year. It's more like August to now, essentially. Let me pull that up real quick for you, so that way you can see exactly how much it cost um, for the whole year that I have owned, for the most part, the whole year that I have owned my Model 3. It has cost me $850 when it comes to charging for the whole year, right? Um, never did like calculations for how much it cost me to like for gas, but I would imagine it's a little bit more expensive. Now, of course, Tesla is has like a little gas saver thingy or whatever like that on the bottom here that says like, if you use the same amount equivalent in gas, then you would have saved blah blah blah. So I guess going off of their metrics, right, it would have been I've saved $1,000 and 60 or $1,060 or something like that. Um, so that's kind of cool. That's been nice. And of course, the lower maintenance also is another thing that is great to kind of talk about. Is if you add that in, right? Um, it kind of becomes a more compelling deal. And then I think I also had it for like Let's see, what else was it? But yeah, no. So that's kind of how much I've had to pay in charging. I would imagine that's not too bad, and um, especially now too, if you um there are some like things that will give you benefits when it comes to charging. So you can also get like points and stuff like that off of it, depending on like if you have like certain credit cards that do that. So that is something that's nice too. Um, but yeah, I mean, charging's not that much of an issue. And like I said, a lot of times I find that it's a lot cheaper than it would have cost me if I would have done something similar or equivalent to when it comes to gas. So I have really enjoyed that, and it has been a nice change when it comes to expenses. Now, with that being said, I guess I should also talk about when I was. Oh, I almost forgot to that $850 when it came to charging is not fully including um the portion that I have been when I have been here, right? So technically, you could actually lower that because this is going off of how much it would have cost me, right? At when I had my townhome. Um, so it's essentially saying that any of those home costs, which in this example is like 30% or whatever like that, any of those home costs for electricity, um, it would have gone off of the thought process that I am paying 17 cents, I think, per kilowatt hour or something similar to that. So um, that would have changed when it came to January because I wasn't paying that anymore, essentially, for the most part. There too. The stream kind of freaked out on us a little bit, so I'm actually going to get close to the end here. This actually went a lot longer than I expected, but I guess there's just a lot to kind of go over and to cover and stuff like that. But anyway, there has been um, I have found that it's been pretty nice when it comes to my whole overarching experience. Like I said, it's nice that I have charging at work, which has been a really big help, as well as here. I'll say most of my range anxiety in some ways have popped up when I've been here because it's just a lot slower when it comes to charging, just because I'm not on my own terms. I would say if you're an EV owner or you're thinking of buying an EV and you have a house, it makes it a lot easier because you're in control of a lot more, right? You can install a charger um, at home, whether it be like an actual charger or, for instance, when I was at the townhome, I just installed like a dryer plug. It's pretty much the same. Sure, you can get slightly faster speeds if you have like a dedicated specific charger or whatever like that. But for me, just getting like a dryer plug and then using the mobile charger that Tesla gives you. Oh, excuse me. That got me by perfectly fine, and I never really had to worry too much about it. So, um, charging, not really that much of an issue. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that most people are afraid of when it comes to EVs in general, is the charging aspect of like, oh man, it's gonna take me, 30 minutes for me to get, to 100 or whatever like that. In all honesty, here it's not as bad as you think it is. Um, Especially if you're doing like long road trips, because the amount of time that it takes is the same amount of time that you would have used if you were taking a long road trip and you would need to stop for gas, but at that same gas station you're going to also grab something to drink or grab something to eat and do this or that or whatever like that. It's going to take you the exact same amount of time pretty much. um, the logic that a lot of these um, EV navigations systems have used is to make it to where it's as painless as possible when you're doing long road trips. I think it's a silly notion for people to feel like, oh man, I have to have an EV that has like 500 or 600 miles of range or whatever like that, because it needs to be the same as a gas car. Because the problem is that most of the time you're not using that. And sure, I guess it's nice to have that peace of mind that you have just all of this extra space, right? All of this extra room. And if you just want to go on a trip spontaneously, you can just go, right? But and the day-to-day usage, and that was kind of one of the things that sold me, was I'm not using that amount, right? I'm not using the 400 or 600 miles, quote unquote, of range or whatever that I had in my Sonata. I'm not using that most of the time. um I'm probably only using like 200 in a given like week or whatever. And also you do things slightly different, right? So for instance, for an EV, you don't want it to get past really and truly like 20%. So you're going to charge it 20%, and then you're not going to charge all the way to full. You're going to charge to 80 or 90%, because that's good for your battery. So that, sure, that does shorten the amount of range that you have, but again, most of the time it's within that usable amount. Nowadays, I pretty much tell people, especially depending on if they're just going to use it for their daily driver and it's not like a long road trip or whatever like that, I mostly tell people, bare minimum, you want to have an EV that has at least 250 miles of range. Anything less than that becomes more of a headache, and anything more than that is a cherry on top, but at the same time, it's not a necessity, right? Um, And as battery technology gets better, and as more automotive manufacturers start to create more electric vehicles, it's just going to get better, right? You're going to get range way higher, right? So, for instance, when it comes to range, I think the two kings right now are like and I may be wrong, but I think it's the Tesla Model S long range that is has like up to 400 miles of range, or 405 miles of range. So pretty decent amount. And then you have the Lucid. I think it's the Lucid Air or something like that. That has like 590 something miles of range or whatever like that. So quite a bit. Um, it's got these weird dinky looking wheels, but it's for aerodynamics and stuff like that. But yeah, huge amount of range. Great for road trips. Day to day use, you just have that extra battery space for nothing. Um, and that is something to also think about too, is that when you have these bigger battery packs, that means you're also having to fill them more. Like there's more to fill, which also means more electricity that you're using. Um, Smaller battery packs, less to fill, it'll fill up faster, stuff like that. So that is another thing to think about. It's similar to, like, if you have a big old truck or whatever like that, and you have this truck with this big old gas tank or whatever, it's going to cost you like $150 or whatever like that just to fill the whole thing up. It's similar to that when it comes to bigger battery packs. So you want to make sure that you get enough range, um, but at the same time, if you can afford it, go ahead, buy you a Lucid or whatever like that that has tons of range, but don't let that be the big deciding factor for you, because I say that most of the time you won't have to worry about it. Um, I think when people think about range and range anxiety, they are thinking about the charging time, but they are also thinking about how a regular gas powered vehicle is. Everyone thinks of, oh, well, I can just charge, or I can just, in a gas car, I can just go to a gas station, charge, and gas up. But you negate the thought process of, well, but I'm leaving home in an electric vehicle, I'm leaving home with 100%, or the equivalent thereof, right, which would be like somewhere around 80 to 90. I'm leaving home with that every morning, hopefully, at least. So I'm already starting at a much higher point. It's like having a gas station at home and you're gassing yourself up every single time. So I think that's a great perspective to think about when it comes to EVs, is because it's such a change in perspective than what you would normally be a you know be used to. Um, but yeah, with that being said, that is pretty much everything when it comes to what I have experienced, what I have dealt with, kind of like the pros and the cons that I've gotten to utilize with my EV, with my car. I'll continue to keep you guys up to date on stuff that I have experienced, things that have gone well, that haven't gone well, stuff like that. I've been blessed to not have to do any weird service appointments, because I know there are some people who have said like, "Oh, it's taken me like, you know, 50 million years to get a service appointment or whatever like that." I haven't had to deal with that or anything like that for my car or anything like that. I haven't had any issues with it, not really. Um, and I there's just a lot to love, honestly. If you're a big tech fan, it's probably one of the best things. Not just a Tesla. I don't want people to think that Tesla is the best thing. It has its flaws. Teslas are fun. They're great. Um, but in some ways, you can kind of think of them as like the iPhone, right? The only main reason why people think of them the most is because they were first, right? They were first to truly commercialize electric vehicles. The reason why I have to say truly commercialize is because sure, there's other electric vehicles before Teslas, but to make them commercially viable, Teslas have been kind of the mainstay in that whole deal. But um, but yeah, there's plenty of EVs out there, and there continue to be more and more of them. So shop around if you want to. I will say Tesla's charging network is probably more reliable, but with these big deals that have been happening lately in the industry, most it probably by this time next year, um, most automakers in North America will be using the Tesla connector. Essentially, I think it's technically called the North American Charging Standard plug or whatever. So most will be using that. So that also um, eliminates the need or the fear of going to the other charging networks, which are like, say, Electrify America, which uses CCS, which is what other electric vehicle use currently. But yeah, it's a different type of charging standard and plug. We talked about it on our podcast a few weeks ago. So yeah, I haven't checked that one out to get a little bit more info on it. But essentially, they use that, and that their network has had issues of downtime and uptime and stuff like that. Um, but um, it's getting better. They're getting better on that side. Cool thing too about a Tesla, I guess, is that you do technically get a chance to use both. So you can use the supercharging network, but you can also, if you are really in a pinch, you can use the other networks, because there are adapters that are currently sold specifically for Teslas to be able to use. So you get a little bit of best of both worlds, but there are plenty of great EV manufacturers out there. I do like Rivians. I think they're really cool. Um, Lucids are cool if you can afford them. Same with Rivians, of course, but um, GM's coming out with some really cool ones. I think they have their Silverado that's coming out. It's going to be electric. Ford already has their F-150 Lightning. That is also really cool. Um, and it's expensive. EVs currently are expensive, but as time goes on, like anything else, it gets cheaper, and it will get cheaper. Battery manufacturing has gone down. Costs have gone down significantly, and that is probably one of the biggest contributors to the higher price tag of EVs. And so, as that price continues to drop, the amount of money it costs for those vehicles to be produced gets lower. So we're getting really close to it. Um, and I think you guys will love them. I think it's something to really to take into consideration. You can do a hybrid. I just want to preface this. You can do a hybrid. I think hybrids do have their place, but I do find that they're becoming less and less relevant nowadays because of the way that EVs are currently, and the amount of range that they now provide. I think it becomes less and less, like, it makes less sense, in my opinion, to get a hybrid nowadays than it did, say, I don't know, a year or two ago. And the charging network is going to get substantially better as more and more government agencies have started to push um, electric vehicle charging networks and all sorts of other stuff. So that has been my year of ownership. We'll call this the Charge Up, as you can see in the title, right? This is my little deal. But yeah, that's my year of being an EV owner, and all of the interesting things that I've come across, things that I've learned. Um, there's always more to learn. There's always more to think about. If I have anything else, I'll either put that in our description below, or we can talk about it a little bit later when I do another charge up or whatever like that. Um, but I hope you guys have a wonderful night, and we will catch up with you guys next week.